I have a confession to make. I am a child of the 80s. Have you ever heard anybody say that? Yeah, I'm a child. I'm a child of the 70s. I'm a child of the 60s. If they tell you they're a child of the 60s, you really know what that means, right? Right. What we mean when we say that, what we mean is we're saying is I'm a product of my environment, of my generation. In other words, I am a product of the things that have influenced me. You see, what I think is funny is based on how I've been influenced. Maybe you were born and raised in New England, maybe your family's been here for generations. I'd like you to know you're the only people on the planet with your sense of humor, all right? And that's because you've been influenced by regionally. What I think is cool is influenced. My attitude towards people that are different from me is an influence on me. My preference in music is based on how I was influenced. You see, my brain says, don't listen to country music. It's not good for you. But my feet can't stop moving whenever I hear it. It's just the way I was influenced. You know, as a child of the 80s, Cyndi Lauper, Boy George, Madonna, Def Leppard, Depeche Mode, The Cosby Show, The Cold War, and of course Michael Jackson. All of these things were part and have been part of what's influenced me. And there are things that have influenced you. Other things have influenced you as well. For example, do you have a mom or a dad, an aunt or an uncle, a teacher or a coach, an employer or pastor, maybe a bus driver, maybe a grandparent? How did they influence you? Did they discipline you? Did they hug you? Did they pray with you? Did they pray for you? Did they read to you? Or did they beat you or abuse you? Did they birth fear into you? Did they expose you to sin and lies and deceit? Or did they inspire you? Did they motivate you? Did they help you to see the unlimited possibilities for your life? Or did they expose you to the unconditional love of our God? How were you influenced? Do you see how that makes a difference in your life? How you've been influenced? Do you see how it might make a difference in somebody else's life? How you influence them? We've all been influenced. But how have you been influenced? Have you been influenced for good, or have you been influenced for evil? In the book of Genesis 37, we find the story of Joseph. He was a much-loved son, but he was despised by his brothers. So they decided to do something terrible. They sold him to slave traders. So in Genesis 37, verse 23, so when Joseph arrived, his brothers ripped off the beautiful robe he was wearing. Then they grabbed him and threw him into the cistern, which is like a water well, a pit. Verse 28, so when the Ishmaelites, who were Midianite traders, came by Joseph's brothers pulled him out of the cistern and sold him to them for 20 pieces of silver, and the traders took him to Egypt. Now, when you're sold into slavery, that's the kind of event in a person's life that influences them. His brothers influenced him for evil. He did not ask for it. He did not want it, but they did it anyhow. Now, let's take a peek at Joseph. How did Joseph handle all this negative influence? How did he handle the negative influence? And as we go through this, you might want to ask yourself the question, how are you handling any negative influences in your life? How are you handling them? You see, you are an influence, and it's important to remember that. Genesis 39, the Lord was with Joseph, so he succeeded in everything. He did as he served. He succeeded in everything he did as he served in the home of his Egyptian master, Potiphar. Notice this. Realize that the Lord was with Joseph, giving him success in everything he did. First off, I just want you to catch this. Joseph did not give up on God. Joseph kept remaining faithful to God even though he was sold into slavery. And as a result, the Lord caused him to succeed in everything, and other people noticed. His master noticed and gave him authority and privilege. You see, I want you to catch this idea. Other people notice you. You might feel like nobody sees you, like nobody cares, but other people notice you. Other people notice who you are, what you say, what you do, what you wear. They see that. They see your attitude in life. And whether you are good or bad, other people notice. You are always an influence. When you think about this for just a second, think about your children, if you have children today. You are an influence to your children. You are an influence to your kids. No matter what you think about how great of an influence, you are an influence. The things you say influence your kids. The things they hear you say to other people influences your kids. The way you speak to your spouse, your children hear, and you influence them. The things you choose not to do influences your children. The things you choose to get involved with or not get involved with, the things you think are appropriate or not appropriate, influence your children. You influence your coworkers, the people that you work with, you influence them. Your spouse, you influence your spouse. So, I want you to think about that. You are an influence. Sometimes I'll see a married couple, they're kind of struggling with life and direction and things like that. And I'll think to myself, I just wish that husband would step up and lead already. Would he just step up and lead? Because if he led, he would influence his family and they could move forward. Sometimes I'll see people and they will start making excuse after excuse in their life. And it would just frustrate me because I think to myself, if that person would just learn to stop making excuses and do the right thing, they could change the world because they are a great influence. You are an influence. And there are people around you that are being influenced by you. You've got to ask yourself, how are they being influenced? Have you allowed your negative influences in your life to now be repeated and now you're negatively influencing others? Or are you going to take that and turn that and break that curse and now positively influence others? So ask yourself, what kind of influence are you? Well, when you are an influence, people start to seek you out. Some people will seek you out for good, and other people will start to seek you out for evil. One of the stories about Joseph is that when Joseph was a slave, in verse 6, Genesis 39, Joseph was a very handsome and well-built young man. And Potiphar's wife soon began to look at him lustfully. "Come and sleep with me," she demanded. But Joseph refused. "Look," he told her, "my master trusts me with everything in his entire household. No one here has more authority than I do. He has held back nothing from me except you, because you are his wife. How could I do such a wicked thing? It would be a great sin against God." A great sin against God. Still, Joseph was putting God's desires first. Somebody sought him out. In fact, I would venture to say that Potiphar's wife was drawn to Joseph because he was a godly man. He was doing the right thing. He was God-honoring in all that he did. He was a good leader. He was wise. He was a good steward of resources. She was drawn to him, but not for good. She was drawn to him for evil. Sometimes people will be drawn to your influence for the wrong reasons. And they will want to take your influence and use it for wicked purposes. You have to avoid that. Others will look at it for good. Further on in the story, verse 21, "But the Lord was with Joseph in the prison." Oh, by the way, after Potiphar's wife got upset with Joseph for not sleeping with her, she told a lie and caused Joseph to go to prison. Now he's a slave. Now he's in prison. This guy has a lot of negative influence going on in his life. He's got a lot of excuses not to do the right thing. But while he was in prison, God showed him his faithful love. And the Lord made Joseph a favorite with the prison warden. Before long, the warden put Joseph in charge of all the other prisoners and over everything that happened in the prison. The warden had no more worries because Joseph took care of everything. The Lord was with him and caused everything he did to succeed. Can you think of anybody with a greater list of excuses for not doing the right thing? It would be Joseph. But Joseph kept on doing the right thing. He kept on honoring God. And God actually was honoring him in the midst of these trials and very difficult situations. He was influencing people all around him. Ask yourself this morning, what kind of influencer are you? Are you the type of influencer that harms, or are you the type of influencer that helps? You see, the type of influencer you are is really determined by the condition of your heart. Think about that. I'm going to say that again because I don't want you to miss it. The type of influencer you are is determined by the condition of your heart. That doesn't mean go to the doctor and check your cholesterol, all right? To influence people rightly, your heart must be right. Because in case you hadn't noticed this, you can't fake your heart being right forever. You can fake your heart being right for a while, but eventually your sins will find you out. And all the brokenness and confusion and wickedness will kind of surface its way up to the top. And you will think you got everybody fooled, but friends, you got nobody fooled. Eventually it comes out. You can't fake your heart being right forever. You see, for centuries, people in power have used the idea of God to influence people to do terrible things. Their influence was great, but their heart was wicked. So they influenced people towards death and destruction. How do you think things like the Crusades happen? People in power use the idea of God to convince people to do wicked things. Their influence was great, but their heart was impure, and it caused mass destruction. Please, this is a real plea from me. Please do not tell people you are a follower of Jesus Christ if you, in fact, do not follow him. Please don't. It messes up other people. I don't know why people would pretend to follow Jesus. What good does that do you? I don't understand it. If you're not following Jesus, you're not following Jesus. But if you are, you are. My plea to you is if you're not following Jesus, please don't tell other people that you are. Because people in our culture are so confused about what is going on. Right now I am working with a guy that I really like, and he would love to follow Jesus. But he is so confused by so-called Christians that he has met and known that they are an obstacle to him. Because they say they follow Jesus, but they don't got a clue who Jesus is. And they're just wicked in their heart, and they're doing foolish things. And he just is all confused because the Jesus in the Bible isn't like that person. And friends, when you follow Jesus, you're supposed to become like Jesus. That's what it's about. And so, what am I trying to say to you? Don't pretend. One thing that we do really, really well here, or we try to do well, is be honest. I don't care how much junk you got. I really don't. I'm not going to condemn you. I'm not going to judge you. But look, friends, if you're trying to follow Jesus, go for it. But if this is just some kind of game to you, go have a come to Jesus moment and break up with Jesus. All right? Go break up with him if you're not going to follow him. Seriously, I'm not kidding. If it's not really what you want to do, then just don't do it. Why am I saying this? Because when you claim Christ, when you put his name on you and your actions, you represent him to other people, and it messes up other people's chance to know Jesus. If you don't want Jesus, then get out the way and let other people get to him. People don't even know what the word Christian means anymore. People are offended by it because Christians have done such wicked things, or people claiming Christ. The term born again means something terrible to our culture. Pentecostal, evangelical, or even the word church. All these terms have been severely damaged by people with influence claiming to follow Jesus and claiming to be righteous. But because their hearts were not pure, they got involved in wicked things and negatively influenced people in the name of Jesus. This is trouble. The Bible warns very, very seriously about it, too. Sometimes people will ask me, what kind of church are you? And sometimes I don't know what to say. I'm like, well, they'll say, what denomination are you? And I'll say, I'm not telling. They'll say, I say, it's just complicated. And they're like, well, so what I usually do when they ask is, they'll say, what kind of church are you? And I'll say, well, what kind of churches are you aware of? to find out like what their experience is, so that and finally I'll say, you know what, it's just confusing. We at East Coast International Church, we just really think Jesus is awesome. That's really what we think, okay? And I know that that's a little bit too unspecific for people, but they can deal with it. A couple weeks ago, in the newspaper, they were interviewing me about something, and they asked what kind of church we were. They said, what denomination? I said, I'm not telling you. I'm just not telling you, because people are going to think something that's not who we are. One of the things I'm really concerned about in our culture, and particularly in our city, is that the church has lost influence. If our city goes through a crisis, who do you think they run to? Do they run as fast as they can to all the churches in town? No, they do not. Why? Because the church has lost influence. Because their influence has been messed up by generations of misuse and claiming Christ on foolish things and foolish behavior. And it's lost its influence. And why is this a problem? It's a problem because it separates people from God. It keeps people that are far from God continuing to be far from God. And that's not okay. You see, church has lost influence in a significant way. On Christmas Eve, I was meeting with a lawyer. Nothing bad. I'm not going to jail. I was meeting with a lawyer, and after we were talking for a while, and doing all the signing and paperwork and stuff, he says to me, because he saw on my form, he goes, "What's a pastor?" And I said, "Pastor." He goes, "Yeah, what's a pastor?" And so I knew he was already in trouble because he didn't even know how to pronounce the word pastor. Okay, and so what's a pastor? And so we're going along talking, and I explain. I'm like, "Well, you've never met a pastor?" "No, I've never met a pastor." All right. Well, I said, "Do you know what a priest is?" No, he really didn't know what a priest was either. And so now, why is this important? He's 35 years old. He's a lawyer. That means he went to college and grad school. He's from Marblehead. So I'm like, "Really? Do you have any kind of church background?" "No." "Did your family go to church anywhere? Have they ever gone?" "No." He goes, "I think we're Protestant," but he mispronounced that as well. And so we continued to talk. Why is this a problem, friends? 35 years old, well-educated. He has no idea. No idea. He's never been influenced in his life in any way by the church. That's scary. That is scary. When you have a generation of people that have had no influence in their life towards God, it's a very, very dangerous place to be. Friends, when your heart is pure and your influence is leveraged, okay, those are two things. They have to go together. Influence and your heart. Your heart has to be pure and your influence has to be leveraged. You can see great things begin to happen around you. When your heart is pure and your influence is leveraged, you will influence your city. When your heart is pure and your influence is leveraged, you will influence your neighborhood. When your heart is pure and your influence is leveraged, you will influence the school that your kids go to. You will influence your family and friends. I've said it already, but you always influence your family. You always influence them. And your influence is either positive or negative at all times. It's never neutral. From time to time, somebody will come to me and ask me if they can tell their story to the teenagers. And I'll say, "Well, okay, well, what do you want to share?" And I said, "Well, like, I've been a drug addict for a lot of years, and I've been sober for like 3 days or 3 weeks or whatever. I just don't want kids to make the same mistake." Guess what? Kids already know don't use drugs. They already know that. Why? Because if they live in Lynn, they're surrounded by people that use drugs. They're surrounded by, they see how much it jacks up the life. They see how messed up their parents' life, or their aunt's life, or their uncle's life. They already know. They don't need to know how not to use drugs. They need to have people that have not been using drugs for a really long time be an influence in their life in a positive way. They don't need to be scared straight. They need people that are already straight influencing their life in a positive way. So what do I say? A lot of times I say to these people, "Well, that's great. I can't wait until you get a chance to talk to the teenagers. Why don't you go take the next year and have a pure-hearted life? Stay clean, stay sober, go get a job, go do something significant with your life, and then let's go talk to the teenagers. How about that?" Okay, that would be a good thing to do. Why? Why do I say that? Because I want us to be the right kind of influence. We don't always need to be a negative influence from a negative perspective, like, oh, I did all this bad stuff. Let's stop worrying about all the bad stuff you did. Let's get some good stuff under your belt and then teach other people how to do some good things. Okay, that would be significant and helpful. You see, to the Christ follower, convenience is never an excuse for sin. Love is never an excuse for adultery. Circumstances are never an excuse for laziness. Past failures are not an excuse for future failures. Addiction is not an excuse for using. And anger is not an excuse for abuse, ever in the life of a person that follows Christ. That is just the way it is. Why am I saying that? Because when you let those excuses happen, you lose your influence in a positive way. You've got to learn to have a positive influence. And so, friends, I am asking you, I'm challenging you to be the right kind of influence. The story goes on with Joseph. The Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has revealed the meaning, the Pharaoh is the king of Egypt, since God has revealed the meaning of the dreams to you, clearly no one else is as intelligent or wise as you are. You will be in charge of my court, and all my people will take orders from you. Only I, sitting on my throne, will have a rank higher than yours. Pharaoh said to Joseph, I hereby put you in charge of the entire land of Egypt. Joseph was betrayed and influenced negatively by his brothers. He was falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. He went to jail. These are some really bad things that have happened to him in his life. And eventually he has an opportunity to speak to the king of Egypt. And as a result, he is put into power to be the second highest in power in the country. And as a result of this position of influence, he was able to navigate Egypt through a great famine, and he literally leveraged his influence to save millions and millions of lives. Why? Because his heart was pure. You can see from the whole story, if you want to read it this afternoon, that Joseph had a heart of forgiveness. He was wise. He had a heart that listened to God. But one of the things that's really important for us to grasp is that Joseph made the decision to live as a victor and not as a victim. Let me say it again. Joseph made the decision in his life to live as a victor and not as a victim. Too many of us are stuck with the stuff that's happened to us, and we've decided to stay stuck there. We've got to move from the place of being a victim and move over to the place of being a victor. That's what we have to do. Maybe you've lived in poverty for generations in your family. It's time to make a decision to rise up to a new level and no longer pass that curse on to the next generation. Maybe education has never been a priority in your family history. Be the first to set a standard and breathe life into those around you. Maybe the idea of having a job and keeping a job has been an unnecessary idea in your life story. I challenge you, begin a career and watch those that you influence thrive along with you. Sometimes we want to achieve spiritual superhero status overnight. Can I remind you, for Joseph, it took years. It took disappointment. It took tragedy. It took slavery. It took false accusation. It took false imprisonment. It took a pure heart before God during all of that. The whole time that was going on, he was influencing people around him. I'm going to ask the worship team to come on back up. As time passed, the heart of Joseph remained pure, and his influence became greater and greater and greater. And this is the vision that I believe God has given us at East Coast International Church for 2013. I believe that this is to be the year of our influence, that this is to be the year of your influence. Let this be the year of a greater influence. This year, let your influence be greater and your heart become purer than it has ever been. Remember this. To the whole world, you might just be one person. But to one person, you might just be the whole world. I'll close with this story. Miss Thompson taught Teddy Stollard in 4th grade. He was slow, unkempt student. He was a loner, shunned by his classmates. The previous year, his mother died, and what little motivation for school he may have once had was now gone. Miss Thompson was frustrated with Teddy quite frequently. But at Christmas time, he brought her a small present. Her desk was covered with well-wrapped presents from the other children, but Teddy's came in a brown sack. When she opened it, there was a gaudy rhinestone bracelet with half the stones missing and a bottle of cheap perfume. The children began to snicker, but Miss Thompson saw the importance of the moment. She quickly splashed on some perfume, put on the bracelet, pretending Teddy had given her something very special. At the end of the day, Teddy worked up enough courage to softly say, "Miss Thompson, you smell just like my mother. And her bracelet looks real pretty on you, too. I'm glad you like my presents." After Teddy left, Miss Thompson dropped down on her knees and prayed for God's forgiveness. She prayed for God to use her as she sought to not only teach these children, but to love them as well. She became a new teacher in that moment. She lovingly helped students like Teddy, and by the end of the year, he had caught up with most of his students. Miss Thompson didn't hear from Teddy for a long time. Then she received this note: "Dear Miss Thompson, I wanted you to be the first to know. I'll be graduating second in my class. Love, Teddy Stollard." 4 years later, she got another note: "Dear Miss Thompson, they just told me I'll be graduating first in my class. I wanted you to be the first to know. The university has not been easy, but I liked it. Love, Teddy Stollard." 4 years later, "Dear Miss Thompson, as of today, I am Theodore Stollard, medical doctor. How about that? I wanted you to be the first to know. I'm getting married next month. I want you to come and sit where my mother would sit if she were alive. You are the only family I now have. Dad died last year. Love, Teddy Stollard." Miss Thompson went to the wedding, sat where Teddy's mother would have sat, because she let God use her to be an influence in Teddy's life. So I ask you this morning, who are you influencing, and how are you influencing them? Is your heart pure, and is your influence leveraged? Do what it is that we are supposed to do. Would you stand with me as we close? Would you bow your heads and close your eyes? I'm going to ask the team to close us in a worship song in just a moment. But, friends, if you'd like to take some time this morning to just respond to God and for 2013 and say to God, "God, let me be an influence in 2013. Let my heart be pure, and let me influence others in the right way." Maybe God wants to reveal to you this morning who it is you're supposed to be influencing. Maybe there's some things that God needs to reveal to you about how you're influencing. Maybe you're not influencing in the right way, and God wants to change that. Well, let Him change that in your heart today. But also, let me not neglect this. You need to ask yourself the question, what's going inside of my heart? What's going on inside that nobody else can see? What little black spot in my heart, what place of brokenness or confusion needs to be addressed? Friends, I would encourage you today, let God begin to address that in your heart. Because until your heart is pure, your influence will never be great as it should be. So if you'd like to take some time up at the altar today to close in prayer, our altar workers will come pray with you. The worship team will lead us in the song right now.